when you're interviewed, you can tell when somebody's not really listening, right? All the time, right?
Oh, yeah.
Happens
absolutely.
all the time?
Oh, yeah. More often than the other.
Right. Which is why I think people come to me surprised at the interview because that's not what they're getting.
Yeah.
So
totally.
I knew I could read, I can tell right away you were totally engaged.
It's kind of an empty feeling when you're out there, when you realize that they certainly are not engaged.
Hi, friends. Welcome to Really Famous. I'm Kara, and this is a special episode.
Hey, everybody. Julian McMahon here. Julian McMahon from Really Famous Podcast.
We should have like almost a little behind the scenes extra. So What did you do to prepare for this?
Nothing.
BS.
I just knew it.
Come on, stop.
I knew it all.
You couldn't be that good.
I looked at your website and then some of your shows, and I'd spent time with you before, and then I kind of just sat and thought about like a kind of thematic way of traveling. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that it was, firstly I wanted to know where you're from and all that kind of stuff anyway, right? But it's also a nice kind of way to get the ball rolling in regards to starting a conversation or whatever that is. But then I wanted it to have its own flow. Let's call it.
It definitely flowed.
So I kind of just sat down and let it flow.
Yeah.
And all that came out in like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
After I'd done my homework, let's call it.
Right.
So that was kind of fun. And then I kind of, I think it's interesting I think it's really interesting. This kind of gets back to the Mike Rowe thing a little bit, but it's also interesting how you ask questions. Right? And so I looked at some of the questions, and let's say, what's one of your favorite memories of when you were a kid? But if you start with when you look back at your childhood and what it was like growing up, what's one of you know what I mean? Like just the small introduction of that kind of question allows it to be a little bit more grounded or a little bit more connected.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I think that's like a therapist trick also.
Right.
Not really a trick, but a technique, which is knowing how to ask a question.
Yeah. I think that's it.
Where the person is comfortable also. You don't want them to feel defensive or worried that they have to have a perfect answer. So I think it's very important to make your guest feel comfortable. That's big. And I don't really give that much thought, but I do think that's an important aspect of it as well. And, as a therapist, you're told never ask a yes or no question because that's just a close-ended question.
Yeah, sure.
So there's not much, nowhere they can go with it. So how you ask is a therapy kind of thing. So you said like Mike Rowe. What do you mean? Like how does that Mike Rowe? How's that a Mike Rowe?
Well, you said he kind of, I had told you the way that he plans out his podcast.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a specific style.
Yeah.
And once you're aware of the concept, you kind of finagle that towards what it is you're trying to accomplish, right? I've done a lot of interviews, the first thing that goes into my head is, why would you ask a question like that?
That's what I'm saying.
You gave me nowhere to go. Do you know what I mean? Like,
so like, what kind of question? What is? You probably
I don't even know right now because
okay.
I've been napping for the last 3 months. So,
we'll talk about that on the next show, by the way.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later. But and then some are, the questions goes for about 35 minutes, and you're like, I don't know, I have no idea what the question is anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's a really kind of interesting. Kind of, I was going to say tactic, but I don't think that's the right. But it's an interesting way once you develop your own. Because I looked at the question, I was like, well, that's too quick, or that's too basic, or that's too. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting.
But also, so the guest, it depends on the guest also. If they're good at going on into detail about things.
Sure.
Then if they are, then the questions aren't even that important.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And what's more important, in my opinion, as an interviewer, is listening to the answers.
Right.
because it's in those answers.
Oh, for sure. Because you hear something and then you can riff on that and you can play with that a little bit and kind of dig into it. Yeah.
So I think it's an advantage to, now that you're an interviewer, now it's an advantage to you to be an interviewee. Because you know what's good on the other side. You know what's you. I'm sure you know. Like if when I was answering something, you could be like, you probably had a sense of, oh, this is great. I didn't even know it would go here. And other times, like, oh, this she's not really saying anything interesting here. Let's move on.
That didn't happen with you.
I didn't think so.
I don't think it ever would.
But you have that sense
absolutely.
of it.
No, absolutely.
Right. So I know as an interviewer what's interesting, and then I go to more of that when they're answering, which you did.
So yeah, that's
okay.
kind of
okay. So you were great. I'm going to give you a little review, and I kind of already said it in that. But so you came in prepared, so you knew a little bit about me. I try not to research too much beforehand because I want to get to know the person from my own experience.
Yeah, so go through that journey.
Yeah, so this is a very fine line I find between
I
being unprepared. So a couple of times I feel like I didn't do enough research on somebody, and that's kind of a bummer too. So you don't want to go too short of it. It's probably better to be more prepared. But I know some interviewers go through everything, and then I just feel like you're going to get the same take on the person if you already know everything about them. Which is the things that haven't already been said are the most interesting things.
Right.
So if you're just going in that direction, you're not going to find the good things.
Right.
So that's a little interview tip for people who are going to start interviewing besides us. But yeah, so you were good at listening. You were totally engaged the whole time, I could tell. And you know that, I bet, as a guest, when you're interviewed, you can tell when somebody's not really listening, right? All the time, right?
Oh, yeah.
Happens all the time?
Oh, yeah. More often than the other.
Right. Which is why I think people come to me surprised at the interview, because that's not what they're getting.
Yeah.
So
totally.
I knew I could read, I can tell right away you were totally engaged, which helps the guest open up.
It's kind of an empty feeling when you're out there, when you realize that they don't, I don't know what it is. I don't want to put a label on it, but certainly are not engaged. Yeah. Right?
But I don't know how you can interview somebody like that, really.
I don't know either. I mean, I think, like, look, the business is the business, and sometimes you never know what people have been through. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You never know what happened in the morning or last night or what they're going to do later. You know what I mean? Like...
Yeah.
So I try not to be
everybody comes in with stuff.
But
right.
It definitely helps when you're engaged with somebody, I think.
All right. So I feel like we should do one, like an intro together or something. Like we should look at the camera together. Like maybe that. Is this still working?
No, this is.
That one is. Okay. So maybe we'll do a little intro together, and we'll just, what do we want to say? See, I'm not as good at this part.
You're not good at the intros. Let me do that.
All right.
No, I'm kidding. I don't know.
Please be my guest. As you know, I'm Kara Mayer Robinson, and this is my special guest interviewer,
Julian McMahon, the interviewer, du jour.
Hope you liked it.